tell, then you see the road. I'm out to my soul into the size whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of, What If Harry Potter Meets Brave? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Harry Potter was angrier than ever, his emerald green eyes shining with rightful fury and frustration as he walked in the forbidden forest, muttering darkly to himself. Life had never been kind to him, and once again, the universe proved it. At the age of 1, a dark wizard by the name of Voldemort, his real name is Tom Marvolo Riddle, but few knows it, attacked his family and killed his parents before dying, leaving Harry as the sole survivor. Then, Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard since Merlin, in his infinite wisdom, note the sarcasm there, thought it was a good idea to send him to relatives of his, the Dursleys. The old man believed that he would be well taken care of by Petunia, who happened to be his mother's sister. Wrong. For 10 long years, he was tortured, abused, insulted, scorned, starved and beaten by the very people who were supposed to take care of him. In the neighborhood where he lived, the Dursleys had made sure that everyone saw him as a delinquent while telling him that he was the son of a prostitute and an alcoholic who also caused their deaths in a pathetic car accident. For 10 years, he endured these treatments, and then, through a half-giant named Hagrid, a nice guy but too gullible, he discovered a whole new world, that his parents had died a hero and that he was a celebrity, the boy who lived. In this new world, he made friends, Hermione Granger, a Muggle-born, and Ron Weasley, a pureblood from a poor family. There he discovered Hogwarts, the magical school, and had the honor of entering his parents' house, Gryffindor, the House of Lions, the House of the Brave. Unfortunately for him, his entry into this new world was not without problems. He acquired a rival, an arrogant and conceited boy named Draco Malfoy, a professor who had a grudge against him for being the son of James Potter, Severus Snape the potions professor, and a long series of dangerous situations. During his very first year, he had defeated a troll, dealt with a possessed Professor Quirrell who wanted to steal the fabled Philosopher's Stone, and helped Hagrid to sneak a baby dragon out of Hogwarts to avoid troubles. In his second year, he discovered he was a Parseltongue, someone who can speak to snakes, and was shunned by everyone at school because they thought he was the heir of Slytherin. He had to deal with a fraud of a teacher while investigating about petrified students. He faced a cursed diary, Tom Marvolo Riddle and AF Basilisk. His third year was no better. He had to face Dementors, horrible creatures they are, a convict named Sirius Black who everyone believes was the Potter's secret keeper and betrayer, a supposed dead man who turned out to be a traitor, Peter Pettigrew, hippogriffs, and a werewolf of a teacher. Oh, and let's not forget about this little travel back in time with the use of Hermione's time turner. And just when he thought he could have a peaceful year, something else broke his hopes. For his fourth year, Hogwarts was chosen to host the Triwizard Tournament, and unfortunately for him, his name somehow came out of this cursed goblet of fire, and due to this, he was now forced to participate in the Triwizard Tournament. Before his name came out, the true champions were chosen. For Beauxbatons, it was Fleur Delacour, for Durmstrang it was the famous Victor Krum, and finally, the champion for Hogwarts was Cedric Diggory, an Hufflepuff student. Like him, they had been shocked about the fact there was a fourth champion participating in the Triwizard Tournament, but the shock turned into outrage, especially from Cedric, who had entered the tournament to get some glory and fame for the Hufflepuff house. The champions weren't the only one outraged by this. The headmasters of all schools and the ministry's representatives were as well. But in the end, he had no choice but to participate, albeit reluctantly. As if it wasn't enough, no one believed him when he tried to convince everyone that he hadn't entered his name in the goblet. Just like during his second year at Hogwarts, but worse, everyone treated him like an outcast, seeing him as a cheat and an attention seeker. The members of Hufflepuff House made his life a constant hell by insulting him and hexing him when the teachers' backs were turned. When he tried to denounce those unfair actions, no teacher, not even his head of house, Minerva McGonagall, did anything to stop his torment because, like the others, they too believed he had cheated. Even worse, they would happily give him detentions if he dared to defend himself. Because of this, Harry completely lost any respect for his teachers or any member of the staff and even made a mental note to never bother them with his problems. Unfortunately for him, to add salt in the wounds, something else happened. While he could understand why the Hufflepuffs were upset at him, Harry soon learned that he couldn't even trust his own house. Why? Apparently, his fellow Gryffindors were as annoyed and frustrated of him as the rest of the school for always getting into the spotlight since he first entered Hogwarts, even if it wasn't by choice. They were so angry that they decided to exile him from Gryffindor Tower. At first shocked and upset, Harry then regained his senses and left to collect his stuff, thinking that if he didn't, his former comrades would take and destroy them all without remorse. Once he gathered his belongings, he left Gryffindor Tower, promising to never come back, no matter what. Once again, he was alone, friendless and left to fend by himself. Once the news of his exile from Gryffindor spread, none of the teachers tried to oppose it, clearly agreeing with it. However, what hurt him more was not the exile or being shunned by everyone at school but that his best friends would not defend him nor comfort him in his time of need. He should have seen this coming, he had thought to himself with dry realization. Ron was and had always been nothing more than a jealous, petty, greedy bastard. The orange-haired young man was the first to believe that Harry had entered his name in the goblet, stating that he was tired of him always being into the spotlight and having everything people wanted, aka was fame and money. The guy he had called a best mate and a friend had called him a liar, a cheater, an attention-seeking prat and many other negative things, and Harry would be lying to himself if he said they didn't hurt him deeply. And then, there was Hermione, his second best friend. Like everyone, she had believed that he entered the tournament, and while she didn't participate in his exile, she had scolded him for his stupidity and recklessness. So much for being the brightest witch of her generation. The Weasley clan as a whole decided to no longer want anything to do with him, and Molly Weasley, the matriarch, sent him back the few stuffs he had left at the Burrow, including his Gringotts vault key, stating that they didn't want a liar and a cheater around them any longer. As if it wasn't enough, his own godfather, Sirius Black, who he had helped to escape the year before, had completely ignored his letters, and it didn't take a genius to understand that the man also believed he had entered the tournament. Because of the treatment he received from everyone at school, Harry isolated himself. Thanks to him being a champion, he was not obligated to go to classes and so wasn't obligated to mingle among his peers, not that he wanted to. He had no longer any reasons to speak to people as none wanted to have him around. The house elves were the only ones who didn't shun him, but they were usually working around the castle, so they spoke to him when he would call them out to get food. 6 days after that fateful evening of October 31st, during a peaceful afternoon, Harry was now heading to the Forbidden Forest to find some peace and quiet despite the dangers lurking there. Why? Not long before, he had gone to the library to read some books when he ran into Ron Weasley, his former friend turned enemy, who, upon seeing him, began to insult him loudly, attracting the attention of students passing by. Things quickly escalated when Ron said something that angered Harry. "You should have died with your parents that night. Because, if they were here, they would probably be ashamed to have a son as pathetic as you." Harry's blood boiled and, to the shock of the spectators, he landed a solid punch on Ron that sent him headfirst to the ground, breaking his jaw. Teachers were called and Ron was sent to MDM Pomfrey while Harry was given detention for attacking a student without provocation. He tried to defend himself, but the students who were present during the altercation denied this, saying that Harry had started the fight. Clearly, they wanted to see him in trouble. When the crowd dispersed, Harry strode out of the castle, muttering his outrage and frustration. Which bring us back to present. They will pay, I swear it. I will make them all pay. Harry James Potter hissed with rage as he walked through a world of dark trees, black bushes and dark grass. He didn't care if someone could hear him, he needed to vent and released his frustration. Every year it's the same. And every year everyone thinks it's my fault. All I wanted was a normal life, but no, because I'm Harry Potter, the F-boy who lived, I have to put up with all this SHT, he shouted angrily, spitting his words with pure hatred. Suddenly, his shoulders sagged as an expression of infinite sadness appeared on his face. Is it too much to ask to be a normal boy? He muttered to himself before rolling his eyes and adding, in a louder voice as the memory of a familiar redhead appeared through his mind. Was it worth it, Mom? Was it worth saving my life just to watch me suffer? Was it worth it? These last words were screamed at the top of his lungs, and as usual, he had no response, whether divine or magical. Nothing but silence responded to his complaint. In a way, Ron is right, I should have died with my parents, he murmured with a sigh as he leaned his back against the bark of a large tree. He collapsed full length, sitting in the soft, dark grass of the forbidden forest floor before rolling his eyes to the sky. And yet I'm still here as usual, I survive alone and friendless, but this time, I don't know how to continue. I want revenge, but how? I'm not the strongest or the fastest nor the most gifted in magic. Maybe I can help. An ancient and feminine voice sounded not far from him. With a jump, Harry found himself on his feet again, wand in hand, and pointing it at the source of that unexpected found himself face to face with an elderly woman who was standing a few feet away from him with a bag of mushrooms in her hands. Her skin had a slightly pinkish hue, with detailed wrinkles and a prominent, bulbous nose. Her mouth was twisted into a tiny mischievous grin, revealing a few crooked teeth. She also had large, expressive brown eyes, and her hair was a disheveled mass of white, giving her a wild appearance. She was draped in what looked like a large, olive-green cloak with a rough, textured appearance, with several small holes scattered across its surface. The cloak covered most of her body. Her hands are gnarled and thin, with long, bony fingers. "Who are you?" he asked her respectfully. She was an elder and she did nothing yet to him, but also suspiciously. The old woman opened her mouth to reply, but a croak stopped her. Harry's green eyes looked up and saw a raven fly towards them before landing on the old woman's shoulder. Harry's eyes remained fixed on the bird, then ignored it to look back at the woman when the latter spoke again. "To answer your question, my young friend, I'm just a poor woman who lives in these woods." "Yeah, right," he thought to himself with a quiet snort. "I thought the forbidden forest was uninhabited," Harry commented with a frown. "By other wizards and witches perhaps, but I have lived and still live in this forest for years," the old woman replied with a nod. "And you're not afraid?" he asked with an eyebrow raised in curiosity but also in skepticism. "Well, the inhabitants of this forest know me and leave me alone as long as I don't come and bother them," she replied nonchalantly before looking him straight in the eyes. "But you, my young friend, what are you doing out here?" Harry opened his mouth to reply, but then something incredible happened. "Caw," he looks depressed, "caw." The bird spoke. His surprised expression turned amusing because the old woman started laughing. "Yes, I know, he can talk, that's all he can do anyway." "Croa, I take offense of those words," croaked the crow indignantly. Seeing the dynamic between his two beings, Harry lost some of his surprise and quickly regained his senses. A talking crow? Why not? He had already faced spiders the size of dogs and a giant snake that could kill someone with a look. So a talking crow wasn't so surprising after all. "I'm not depressed, I'm just angry," he answered the bird calmly, his wand once again put away. "And why exactly are you angry, my young friend?" asked the old woman with an inquisitive look. Harry remained silent for a moment, wondering if it was wise to talk about his problems with a complete stranger, but a small voice in his head told him he should. Taking a deep breath, Harry decided to take the plunge and told the old woman and her raven everything that had happened to him in his life. It took him several minutes, but when he was finished, he was short of breath and his throat was almost on fire. In front of him, the old woman remained silent, looking at him with her brown eyes, an impassive expression on her wrinkled face. The raven, for its part, gave him a look of compassion, which was strange coming from a bird, but it comforted him a little. "I see, I sympathize with your pain, my young friend, and I am ready to help you," she finally said after a few moments with a small smile on her face. "Really? You would do that?" he asked with surprise but also delight. Of course. But nothing is free, my young friend. I will help you if you pay the price, she replied with shining eyes. Harry fell silent, watching the woman with calculating, thoughtful eyes, and she threw him into his thoughts, calmly waiting for his answer. Very well, he finally said before taking out his wand and pointing it towards Hogwarts. ACCIO trunk. A few seconds later, a small trunk landed near him, and he slowly went to retrieve what was inside it. From the trunk, he pulled out a large silver cloak. It was his father's invisibility cloak, an ancestral artifact of the Potter family. He looked at it for a moment, and in his eyes shone a glimmer of regret, but it was quickly dimmed by another feeling, determination. Then, from the trunk, he pulled out another object, a golden key. He turned to the old woman and handed her the cloak. This is an invisibility cloak. It has been in my family for generations, and I also give you this, the key to my Gringotts account. The old woman looked at the cloak in surprise for a moment, her eyes shining with a light he didn't recognize, then looked at the golden key for a brief moment before returning her gaze to the young man in front of her. You are prepared to hand over not only a family heirloom but also the key to your account? Hunger justifies the means, he commented simply, his emerald green eyes shining with determination. This will keep us going for years, Caw, the raven croaked excitedly, but the woman ignored it, her gaze still locked with Harry's. Then, in the blink of an eye, she grabbed the cloak and the key and put them in her basket of mushrooms. Once this small task was completed, she looked back at the young man before saying, "Follow me." Then she set off, her raven still perched on her shoulder. Harry watched her for a moment, then followed her slowly, his eyes shining with curiosity but also excitement. Harry followed the old woman as she led him deeper and deeper into the forest. Normally, Harry would have been nervous about going so far away from Hogwarts, but her forced isolation had transformed her into someone more steadfast and cold. Soon, after what seemed like an eternity, Harry found himself in a huge clearing at the edge of the forbidden forest, and a few steps away from him was a small dwelling nestled into a small hill. The structure had a wooden door that was closed. The hill was covered in moss, lichen, and other plants, but still, to Harry, it made the cottage seem more welcoming. Then, he heard a snap of fingers and turned his head to see the witch opening the door to her home. With a gesture of her hand, she indicated the entrance, and he did so after a brief moment of hesitation. Once inside, he took great care to inspect the area. It was kinda rustic but still charming in his opinion. In the middle of the room, stood a large, dark cauldron positioned over a roaring fire. The flames cast a warm orange and red glow, illuminating not only the base of the cauldron but also the entire area. All around him, various objects were cluttered, countless glass vials and bottles were hanging from the ceiling, candles were placed throughout the room along with other elements such as shelves with more bottles and possibly other ingredients and plants. But then, his emerald green eyes fell on the woman again when she went to stand near the cauldron. "Last time I did this was for a princess and before that, for a prince," she commented while clapping her hands. "Both were easy on the eyes," Caw, added the crow while perching not too far from them. "The first demanded I give him the strength of 10 men and he gave me this," the woman explained while pulling out a ring with 2 crossed axes on it. Then, she pulled it back where it was before picking up something else, a silver pendant decorated with 3 entwined bears. "And the previous owner of this pendant demanded I give her something to change her mother along with something else," the old woman commented with fond remembrance. Harry was mesmerized by the pendant but then regained his senses when she pulled it back where it was whatever it was before. "Both of them had what they wanted, their fates were changed and I never received any complaints afterwards," the elderly woman added while looking at the young man before she asked him. "So what is it that you want again?" "I want to be strong enough to take revenge on those who wronged me. I want to be so strong even their deadliest spells would be useless against me," Harry declared strongly and firmly, his eyes shining slightly. The old woman stared at him for a moment before nodding her head in understanding. "Very well." Then she went to work. Harry was no expert in potions, all thanks to a bitchy greasy bat-like man in Slytherin Tower, so he could only stare and watch as the elderly woman threw stuffs after stuffs into her cauldron, causing its inside to change colors from dark gray to a appealing sapphire blue. Suddenly, the woman's shabby crow flew towards Harry, who let out a cry of protest and pain as the cursed bird stole a hair from him and gave it to its mistress, who delicately placed it in the pot. The second the hair entered the mixture, the latter lost its sapphire color and became incandescent red like molten lava. Harry, who was recovering from the pain of having a hair forcibly ripped out, watched as the witch took out a ladle to stir the mixture. She made a few turns and then took the ladle out of the cauldron, except that there was no end left because it had literally melted. Harry frowned at this and his expression became incredulous as she took out a metal mask to put on her head before taking out another one for the bird. Oddly, the latter's mask was shaped like its beak. However, our hero didn't dwell on this detail. His attention was entirely on the cauldron when the latter, after the witch added some kind of powder inside, began to light up little by little. "What's th-" he began to say before being interrupted by the woman who covered his face with her left hand. At the same time, a blinding light escaped from the cauldron as well as a small bang. When the light faded, the old woman removed her hand from Harry's face while removing his mask. The raven cawed as the witch took out a pair of tongs, the same ones blacksmiths use, before taking something out of the bubbling cauldron. It was a piece of candy. "A candy?" he mumbled in confusion, frowning deeply. "You don't want it?" the witch asked him sharply, and he quickly backpedaled. "Yes, I do. But are you sure this candy can help me?" Harry asked her skeptically while looking at her with a raised eyebrow. "Trust me, it will do the job," the old woman said with a smirk and twinkle in her eyes that reminded him somehow of a certain old fart at Hogwarts. Although skeptical, Harry accepted the witch's words, and after exchanging a few words, he left. As he walked towards Hogwarts, he turned his gaze to the candy he was carrying in his hand, and a dark, malicious smile slowly appeared on his face. Although the loss of his invisibility cloak hurt, it was necessary and for a good cause. As for the money, he didn't care. All that mattered to him right now was his revenge. He didn't know it then, but this candy would indeed help him in his quest for vengeance, but also completely change his destiny like two other people before him. By the time Harry returned to Hogwarts, the sun had already set, and the light of day was slowly turning into the darkness of night. As he walked, he couldn't stop thinking about the candy in his hand and the old witch's words. "This candy will help you in your revenge, but it will also change your destiny and perhaps the destiny of everyone around you," she had told him before she left, her voice deep and firm. Harry mulled over the witch's words, and each time, he grew more confident and excited about using the candy. However, a part of his doubt remained: what would happen after he ingested it? Would he turn into a monster? Or would he become a being so powerful that everyone would fear him? He had no answer to that question, but one thing was certain: no matter what, he would get his revenge. Everyone who insulted him, pushed him around, bullied him, and bothered him will pay dearly. For a moment, he was ready to eat the candy here and now, but he forced himself to wait. Why? Because revenge is a dish best served cold. In a short while, it will be dinner time, and all the students from Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang, as well as the teachers and headmasters, will be present and all gathered. That's when he will act. Very soon, he promised himself with a dark smile that would scare an acromantula. But just as he was about to enter through one of Hogwarts' secret entrances, a female voice spoke behind him. "Good evening, Harry Potter." Abruptly, he turned around and found himself facing a young girl who was looking at him, smiling mysteriously. She looked to be around 12 or 13 years old at most and had straggly, waist-length, dirty blonde hair, very pale eyebrows, and protuberant silver eyes that gave her a permanently surprised look. There was an aura of distinct dirtiness radiating from her, Harry noted with narrowed eyes, but it was perhaps due to the fact that she had her wand stuck behind her left ear, or because she was wearing a necklace of butterbeer caps. In addition, due to a visual lack of shoes, the girl was barefoot. "Who are you?" Harry asked suspiciously once the surprise had passed. His muscles were tense, like a cornered animal, ready to pounce or attack. The candy was out of sight because the hand holding it was now a clenched fist. The other hand, meanwhile, was millimeters from our hero's wand. However, to Harry's surprise, the young girl didn't seem at all intimidated by his abrupt tone or defensive posture. She was still smiling, but not mockingly. "Me? I'm Luna Lovegood, but my classmates at Ravenclaw call me Loony," she replied in a calm, almost angelic voice. "And you're Harry Potter," she added, tilting her head to one side, her silver eyes boring into his. "Yes," he grumbled suspiciously, his green eyes still focused on the stranger. A deep silence fell as the two parties stared at each other. Luna hardly ever blinked, and Harry had a terrible time trying to do the same. Soon, unable to bear it any longer, he broke the silence. "Why are you barefoot and outside?" he asked abruptly. "All my shoes somehow magically disappeared, but I'm not concerned, they'll show up sometime, even when you least expect it," she replied with a smile and shining eyes. Harry instantly understood that the person in front of him was also being bullied by his peers and relaxed slightly. The question remained as to what she was doing outside. As if reading his thoughts, she spoke again. "I wanted some peace and quiet. I wanted to be away from all those people infected with Raxburts." "What?" he asked in confusion. "Raxburts, they're invisible, they float in through your ears, and make your brain go fuzzy. I felt a lot of them in Hogwarts, and it started since your name came out of the goblet." At this, Harry tensed his muscles and narrowed his eyes. "I believed you when you said you didn't enter your name in the goblet, you weren't infested with Raxburts," Luna replied calmly with a smile of pure innocence. Harry relaxed, and for the first time, he seemed happy. Someone believed him. "Does anyone else believe me?" he asked her hopefully. That hope was shattered when he saw her shake her head from side to side. The message was clear: no. At that moment, frustration enveloped Harry, and his longing for revenge vanished. Looking back at Luna, he became thoughtful. This girl, this stranger, though a little moody, was the only person who had openly told him she believed him. And for that, she would be spared. But first. "Luna. Could you," he began softly when she interrupted him. "Not come to dinner tonight in the Great Hall? I hadn't really intended to too many Raxburts for my liking, and I have plenty of friends in the forest to keep me company." Harry blinked in surprise, wondering how she knew what he was going to say before he'd even opened his mouth, and then he decided it hardly mattered and focused on the present again. "Don't you have any friends in Ravenclaw?" "No, I thought Ginny was, but ever since she started at Hogwarts, she's been avoiding me," she replied, before explaining that people found her too strange to be around and that she was the daughter of Zeophilius Lovegood of the Quibbler newspaper, who was seen by his peers as a madman and a deranged individual. At the end of the girl's story, Harry felt anger rising within him while his compassion grew. Luna reminded him a little of himself as a child, but she had a father who loved her while he had no one, which is still the case today. "I'm sorry to hear that, Luna, but I promise you things will change. For starters, I'd like to be your friend," Harry whispered gently to the girl, who suddenly became more radiant. "Really?" Luna replied with a big smile. Harry nodded, and suddenly he found himself in a gentle embrace, Luna's arms around his waist while his face was pressed against her chest. At first surprised, Harry's expression softened, and he returned Luna's hug. They stayed like that for a moment, then separated. "You should go, dinner will be starting soon, Harry," she added calmly, glancing towards Hogwarts Castle. Indeed, as he spoke, night had fallen, and lights could be seen through the windows of the Hogwarts towers. "Yes, indeed. What will you do now?" he asked her curiously. "Me? I'll stay with my friends in the forest. I'll ask an elf to bring me something to eat," Luna replied with another smile before walking straight into the woods. But before she entered, she turned to cast one last glance at our hero. "May you find the peace you longing, Harry Potter, my friend." Harry gave her a smile and a nod before watching her disappear into the forbidden forest. Once she was gone, Harry's expression hardened and became icy, and with a determined stride, he walked towards Hogwarts to fulfill his quest for revenge. Entering Hogwarts was easy, the corridors were empty, as everyone was presumably in the Great Hall celebrating. A profound silence filled the empty halls of the magical school, soon broken by the sound of Harry's footsteps. With a resolute look in his eyes, he walked straight to the entrance of the great hall and stood before its massive doors. On the other side, he could hear the laughter and conversations of the people gathered inside. Harry remained silent and still for a moment, then he took a deep breath and pushed the doors open forcefully. At the sound of the doors opening, conversations ceased instantly, and all eyes turned to Harry. He looked at everyone present with disdain and an icy expression, his emerald green eyes, which many would say were the color of the killing curse, Avada Kedavra, shining coldly. Once the initial shock had passed, murmurs rose in the hall. "There's the cheater. Can't he just disappear? We'd be better off without him. How can he show his face after what he did?" Then the murmurs grew into shouts and louder exclamations. "Get out, Potter. We don't want any cheaters and liars here. Go away, Az. You're not welcome here. Go back to your hole and stay there." Despite the insults, Harry didn't move or react. His eyes fell on the teachers, who made no move to stop the students. Some, especially that damned Severus Snape, seemed to take pleasure in seeing students from all the houses openly insult him. Calmly, he took his wand and pointed it at his throat before opening his mouth and yelling, "Shut the F up." A long silence followed as everyone, be they adults or children, all stared at him with wide eyes, unable to believe what he just did. They were still shocked when he spoke again. "I will keep this brief, you all disgust me. You are nothing but a bunch of pathetic sons and daughters of bees with no brains." All voiced their outrage at the insults, but Harry yelled at them to shut up again, and, like the dogs they were, they did. "Before I joined the wizarding world, I thought I was nothing but a freakin' abomination, all thanks to people who were supposed to be my family." His emerald green eyes landed on a shocked Dumbledore. "New flash you oldf the Dursleys are and will never be my family. Your BLD wards might have protected me from those pathetic Death Eaters, but it did nothing to protect me from what was happening inside the house." The crowd of people looked shocked and horrified. Many were shooting glares of anger toward Dumbledore, who paled in horror. Beside him, Minerva McGonagall looked like she wanted to throw up, but then she shot a vicious glare at Dumbledore, who recoiled in slight fear. "When I received my letter, I was happy because, not only did I was different from the Dursleys, but now I have finally found a world I could fit in." His eyes passed through the people around him. "But I didn't. You all saw me as the great boy WHO lived, hero of stupid made-up stories and for supposedly being the one who destroyed the Dark As. New flash, you stupid it was my mother who did it. How people could believe a baby could destroy a Dark Lord is beyond me." The crowd of people, students and teachers alike, all looked outraged and angry at his words, but when they voiced their protests, he spoke again, completely ignoring everyone. "Ever since I joined your world, my life became nothing but a series of troubles because every year, I found myself in dangerous situation like that pathetic Quirrell and the Troll in first year, the godforsaken Basilisk and a possessed Diary in second, DM and Dementors, a rabid werewolf and that Peter Pettigrew in third year, and now, for my fourth year, this godforsaken tournament." Everyone was silent at this point, processing what they just heard. At the staff table, Dumbledore looked very embarrassed that those events were said in front of their foreign guests. The Hogwarts staff all looked down, unable to look at anyone in the eyes, while the foreigners all looked stunned beyond anything. Harry looked at everyone present for a moment before speaking again. "When my name came out of this thrice blasted goblet, I tried to tell you assholes that I didn't put my name in it, but what did you all do? You made my life a living hell, you cursed me, shunned me, and went as far as exiling me from the house of my parents." Some people looked down in shame, but there were a few who looked defiantly at him, and one of them was a familiar and annoying young man with orange hair and freckles. "Shut up, Potter. Stop lying. We all know you entered your name. So, for once in your stupid life, stop trying to gain attention, for cheater." Ron Weasley's voice echoed from the seats. Harry's emerald green eyes landed on his former friend with cold indifference before saying in a solemn tone, addressing everyone in the assistants while waving his wand. I, Harry James Potter, swear on my life and magic that I didn't enter my name in the tournament, that I never asked someone to do it for me and that everything I said was true. So mote it be. At this declaration, the gathered people all gasped in shock as a bright light surrounded Harry for a brief moment before disappearing. Pointing his wand at the sky, Harry reopened his mouth to say, Expecto Patronum. From the tip of his wand, a silvery stag came out. Many youngsters, and even some adults, gasped in shock and awe. The foreigners were stunned to see a fourth year able to perform a corporal patronus. The silvery stag jumped around the crowd of people, as if looking for some dark foes to destroy before disappearing. Do you see now? I am still alive and still have my magic. Harry said loudly thanks to the charm on his neck. The Hogwarts students, along with those of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, all looked guilty for their behavior, but there were a few mainly from Slytherin, but there were some Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs who sneered back at him, still not believing him. The staff also looked guilty, both for not believing him and for not helping him in his time of need. Snape, him, was the only one who still sneered at him, but Harry ignored the man completely. For the second time since I entered the wizarding world, I was shunned, cursed, hexed and abandoned by people who were supposed to be my friends and comrades. But they all turned out to be traitors. If people didn't feel remorse before, they felt it tenfold now. But Harry didn't care about their feelings, just like they didn't care how he felt when they betrayed him. And now it is time for you all to pay. He barely finished talking that he threw the candy the witch gave him into his mouth before swallowing quickly. Yuck! It tasted awful. At first, he felt nothing, then a throbbing pain spread throughout his body, from his toes to his head. The pain was so intense that he fell to his knees, clutching his skull. Mr. Potter! Dumbledore cried out in panic and alarm, leaping from his throne and rushing to the young man, followed by Severus and Minerva, and behind them, the rest of the staff. The students, too, had risen, their panicked and worried eyes fixed on Harry's screaming form. But when the teachers were about a meter away from Harry, he threw his head back, and from his throat came a sound that paralyzed all who heard it with astonishment and terror. Why? Because what escaped Harry's lips was not a cry of agony and pain, but the thunderous roar of an animal in pain. Before the astonished and shocked eyes of the spectators, Harry's body began to change and transform. His entire body seemed to grow, and soon his clothes were torn away, causing gasps of surprise from the audience. Harry's hands and feet became massive paws with razor-sharp claws. His thin, fragile shoulders became more muscular and square, his thin legs became thicker and a broad chest replaced his flat one. His slender arms, like his legs, became as thick as tree trunks. Besides his body, his face also changed, his head became more rounded, his nose became a wide snout, his teeth became sharper, his ears changed place to be placed almost at the top of the skull while becoming more rounded. The students of Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang, along with the professors, Ludo Bagman and Crouch Sr., watched the scene with fascination and horror, while Harry continued to scream in pain as red and gold hairs slowly appeared on his body, covering his pale skin. Dumbledore, stunned by what was happening, noticed Harry's scar releasing a kind of black liquid, and his cries were so loud that no one heard the death throes emanating from the dark mixture. What they all didn't know, Harry included, was that the latter's transformation was being altered by two substances flowing through the young man's veins, the tears of Fawkes the Phoenix and the venom of the Slytherin monster aka the Basilisk. Previously, the witch's spells transformed anyone into a bear whose physical appearance depended on the victim's size and physical, but because of what flowed in Harry's blood, the spell mutated. The Phoenix was a magnificent being, capable of healing wounds with its tears, and whose song could calm even the most tormented or fear-filled minds of those with evil hearts. The Basilisk, on the other hand, possessed great resistance to all types of physical attack due to its impenetrable scales, but also one of the deadliest venoms in existence. It also possessed the power to kill with a single glance. When Harry ingested the enchanted candy, the spell took into account the two other elements living within him and appropriated them, and the result became visible to everyone a few moments later. Indeed, after a time that seemed endless to many, especially Harry, the pain subsided, and he could breathe normally. However, all around him were silent, their eyes reflecting their fear, their shock, and above all, their fascination with what Harry had become. "What how?" Dumbledore stammered, looking at the creature standing a few steps away, surrounded by the other adults. "By Merlin," Minerva whispered in shock, hand covering her mouth and her eyes wide. Around the two, murmurs of shock echoed from the crowds, while the teachers, too stunned by this sudden turn of events, stayed frozen in shock, unable to form words. Where a short and thin 14-year-old boy had stood a short while ago, now stood an enormous, massive creature. The beast resembled a bear, but larger and more powerful, with fur that amazed many in the audience. The bear was partially covered in magnificent, vibrant red fur with gold stripes on its flanks, back, and broad chest. Despite the fact that the beast's head was slightly lowered, everyone could clearly see that the outline of its eyes, which were closed, was also gold. The beast was powerfully built with broad shoulders, strong limbs, and bulging muscles. Even with that description, the creature was formidable, its size was equally noteworthy. "That bear is enormous. I've never seen a bear so big." "Because you've seen a bear before." "Yes, at the zoo." "Is it my imagination, or is that bear as big as Hagrid?" commented a Gryffindor student with dread and fear. "I think it looks bigger," Ginny Weasley commented in a small voice, hoarse with fear and fascination. And she was right. Hagrid was 12 feet tall, 3.65 meters, and this bear, though still on all fours, was at least 13 feet tall, 3.96 meters. Speaking of Hagrid, the half-giant was mystified by this creature, judging by the way his eyes shone with admiration. Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley, meanwhile, were frozen in shock, unable to believe that the enormous creature before them had just moments before been Harry Potter, their former friend. They glanced at Dumbledore, who, like them, was paralyzed with shock. And what about Harry? He was relieved the pain had subsided, but once he'd regained his senses, he took in the state of his arms and grimaced. Instead of arms and hands, he had hairy, clawed legs. Slowly, he turned his head to inspect his body, and to his astonishment, he was no longer human but something else entirely. As panic rose within him, he realized something else: he felt stronger and more powerful than ever. He felt almost capable of lifting mountains. His eyes fell upon his bulging muscles, and a great surge of pride filled his heart. Then he looked down at its claws and marveled at its sharp, razor-sharp blades. He was still staring at his claws when a familiar voice forced him to look away. "Harry?" Raising his head, he found himself face to face with Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts, whose face was clouded with shock and nervousness. Once the initial shock and surprise had passed, Dumbledore decided to approach the bear, ignoring the murmurs around him. So focused was his attention on the beast he still found it hard to believe it was Harry, which at that moment was staring at its clawed paws. When the bear raised its head to look at him, Dumbledore saw that the bear's eyes were a familiar emerald green, but he decided to focus on the present situation, the large red and gold bear before him. "What have you done?" he whispered to the beast with a disappointed look on his aged face. The bear, Harry, huffed loudly through his nostrils, looking at the old man defiantly. "I will tell you what Potter did, Albus. He turned himself into a beast." Probably to attract more attention, the annoying voice of Severus Snape echoed as the greasy-haired BSTRD approached them, his usual sneer still marking his face. At those words, murmurs of agreement echoed from the crowds and Harry became angry. With a heavy, swaggering gait, he approached Severus, who raised an eyebrow in his direction, his gaze disdainful. "You think you are intimidating me, Potter," he spat contemptuously with a haughty look on his face. An expression he quickly lost when, with a roar of anger, Harry slapped him with his right paw, sending the professor flying through the air and crashing heavily to the ground. Loud gasps of shock echoed in the air as everyone stared with wide eyes at what just happened. "Mr. Potter! Minerva cried out in shock and outrage, but she soon stiffened in fright when the massive bear turned its head to look at her with narrowed eyes. "Someone call MDM Pomfrey." Albus Dumbledore shouted, glaring at Harry, who merely snorted in response. "It's no use," Albus Flitwick, head of Ravenclaw House, retorted solemnly as he leaned over Severus's motionless body. "And why is that, Filius?" Pomona asked the half-goblin, confused. "I regret to inform you that Professor Snape is dead," Filius Flitwick replied gravely. Gasps of horror and surprise rippled through the room, women covered their mouths with their hands while men turned pale, including Dumbledore, who seemed pained and shocked by the news. The only one who appeared unaffected was Harry the Bear, who looked bored. Suddenly, one of the Hogwarts students, Draco Malfoy, turned to the bear with an expression of rage. "You killed my godfather, you beast. You'll pay for this, Potter," the blonde boy shouted before pointing his wand at the bear. "Avada Kedavra." "No." Hermione, Ginny, Dumbledore, Minerva, Filius, and many others screamed in horror as they saw the killing curse hurtling straight towards Harry, who didn't even try to dodge Malfoy's attack. Many expected Harry to perish under the most powerful spell ever created, but to everyone's dismay, this was not the case. Harry was still alive and seemed perfectly unharmed. As for Harry, although surprised that Draco had used the killing curse, he was delighted to see that the witch's candy was working and couldn't help but curl his lips into a triumphant grin. Now that he had formal proof that his deal with the witch had been successful, it was time for him to fulfill his promise of revenge. Taking advantage of Malfoy's surprise and the crowd's shock, Harry launched his attack with a thunderous roar. What happened next was nothing short but a complete slaughter. Although they had the advantage of numbers, the witches and wizards present were being gradually massacred by the enormous bear. Despite possessing wands and a good knowledge of spells, the older students and teachers were clearly too weak to hope to compete with Harry's colossal strength and unbridled, animalistic rage. In this new form, Harry gave free rein to his fury, frustration, and hatred as he confronted his enemies head-on, tearing them apart with his claws and fangs as their spells ricocheted off his fur. The great scarlet and gold bear attacked everything in its path, students and teachers alike. Many students, particularly those in their 6th and 7th years, lost their lives to the claws and fangs of the raging bear, and several teachers also perished, including Sprout, Pomona, and Minerva McGonagall. Karkaroff, the headmaster of Durmstrang, was also killed by Harry, disemboweled by the latter's powerful claws. The younger students huddled at the back of the room, where the teachers and the headmaster ate their daily meals. Their eyes shone with terror as they witnessed the massacre. Moments later, only Dumbledore, Hagrid, Flitwick, and Sinistra remained alive among the Hogwarts professors. Of the 7th-year students, a small handful from Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang combined had survived and stood beside the professors, their wands pointed at Harry. No 6th-year students remained, all killed by Harry. Madame Maxime, the headmistress of Beauxbatons, had lost her left arm, torn off by a single blow from Harry's paw. Alastor Moody also perished, his head laying a few feet away from the main body. The great hall was in a pitiful state. The chairs, benches and tables were pulverized, the floor was covered with the blood of the bear's victims and littered with the corpses of students and teachers who bravely faced the beast. Harry's shaggy face was smeared with the blood of his enemies, his green eyes shining with satisfaction and confidence as he surveyed the few survivors of his assault. His massive paws were also covered in blood, as was the upper part of his chest. The old Harry would have been horrified by the sight of the many lifeless bodies littering the floor or the blood pooling on the parquet, but now he reveled in his enemy's fear. He had long been the victim of fear, and now he was the one inflicting it. It was a magnificent change. Just a few steps away, the last vestiges of a school life of suffering stood before him, and like a flame, Harry was about to extinguish them completely. His gaze swept over the people standing before him and noted with satisfaction the terror shining in their eyes. Good, very good. Now they understood what he had felt not only during his 2nd year but also in his final days. When his green eyes fell upon the few surviving professors, his gaze hardened. If they had done their job, none of this would have happened. If Dumbledore had announced to everyone that he hadn't put his name in the goblet, things would have been different, but instead, the man he had once admired had let him suffer. Hagrid, the first magical being he had ever met, had also betrayed him. The halfling knew him, and yet, like the others, he had believed he had put his name in the goblet and had done nothing afterward to support him when he needed a friendly shoulder. And let's not even mention the students in his year. All of them had hurt him, and he was going to pay dearly for it. With a furious growl, the great scarlet and gold bear advanced slowly toward his last enemies, frightening the younger ones and making the older ones tremble with fear. However, the professors immediately pointed to Harry's colossal size, their expressions showing nothing but defiance and a determination to protect their charges. At this sight, Harry stopped, and for a moment, the two sides sized each other up, waiting to see who would make the first move. Then suddenly, a familiar female voice rang out. "Wait!" It was Hermione, who had stepped between the bear and the professors. She was soon joined by Ginny Weasley, who, ignoring her brother's protests, came to stand to Hermione's left. The large bear had frozen, its emerald green eyes fixed on the two girls. Behind them, the professors had also frozen, no longer daring to cast spells now that the pair stood before them. Hermione and Ginny, for their part, focused all their attention on the large, scarlet, green-eyed bear, and for a few moments, they remained silent. Then, Hermione spoke, her voice imploring but firm. "Harry, please, stop this massacre. It isn't you. That's right. The Harry we know would never kill anyone and for no reason." Ginny added, her voice equally firm. At these words, Harry's eyes narrowed in anger, for no reason. With a powerful roar, he slammed his right paw violently to the ground, frightening everyone present. Hermione and Ginny took a step back, intimidated and disconcerted. "I think he's trying to say he had a reason for doing this," Flitwick commented from his post, his wand still pointed at the great bear. "What could it be, Professor? Because I can't see what reason he could possibly have for doing all this," Ginny exclaimed, pointing to the numerous bodies lying on the floor of the great hall. "Me neither, I can't see what would drive Harry to kill innocent people," Hermione retorted in agreement with Ginny's words, and soon, murmurs of agreement echoed the crowd. Suddenly, Ron Weasley stepped forward, his eyes blazing with anger as he faced the crowd. "It's obvious, isn't it? Potter has always been an evil being. A dark wizard. Remember, he speaks Parseltongue, by Merlin's ball. Only dark wizards like you know who speak it. And every year, he brings misfortune to Hogwarts so he can get attention by solving it." The carrot-haired boy's words were dripping with venom as he glared at Harry. Many in the crowd nodded their heads in agreement, while a few shot murderous glances at the Scarlet Bear. Dumbledore and the surviving professors, however, seemed to disagree with Ronald's words and gave him disapproving looks which he superbly ignored. And let's not forget that he put his name in the goblet before telling everyone he hadn't done anything. Lies, I say. He did it to be back in the spotlight as the attention-seeker BRT he is. And when no one wants to glorify him, what does he do? He uses dark magic to become that thing. The last words were spat out with unprecedented disgust. The students voiced their agreement, and the teachers did nothing to stop it, as they seemed to agree with that last statement. Harry's rage grew as he watched the scene. They still don't realize what they've done. And they dare blame him again. This was the last straw. His entire body galvanized by rage and anger, Harry, with a roar of fury, charged his enemies. Hermione and Ginny didn't have time to react before Harry's massive form pounced on them, tearing them apart with his claws and fangs. "No!" cried the Weasleys in horror as they watched their sister being slaughtered by the enormous creature. Once the two girls were dead, the bear turned its gaze upon the survivors, who stared at it in horror, and then, with another roar of animal fury, it charged. The sun was high in the Scottish sky, its rays caressing everything it touched, illuminating the world and bathing it in its light. The Forbidden Forest was as alive as ever as its inhabitants went about their business. Centaurs patrolled, unicorns grazed, bowtruckles played in the tall grass. Nothing but serenity and calm pervaded these woods, considered dangerous by magical humans. Not far from the forest, a young woman walked quietly and calmly through what had once been the small wizarding village of Hogsmeade. A few years before, this village had teemed with life, but now Hogsmeade was nothing more than a ghost town, the houses abandoned and partially destroyed. Many of them were now covered in moss and lichen, and small animals could even be seen scurrying about. The stone ground was now mostly covered with weeds and a few flowers. For those who knew the place, it was a sad sight, a reminder of the terrible events that had taken place a few years earlier and led to this disaster. But before talking about that, let's focus on the woman first. She was a strikingly appealing woman with long, straggly, dirty blonde hair and light-colored eyes. She was quite tall and appeared to be around 19 or 20 years old. She wore a rather unusual outfit with some jewelry, but nothing extravagant. Her face displayed incredible calm, even though her eyes swept her surroundings with curiosity and a touch of nostalgia. Who was this woman bravely walking through this ghost town? It was Luna Lovegood, once a student of Ravenclaw at Hogwarts and now a qualified and recognized magizoologist. Following the events of a few years earlier, Luna was forced to leave Hogwarts to attend another magical school and graduated from Beauxbatons in France. To understand why Luna had to leave Hogwarts, we must go back 4 years to November 1994, the year the Triwizard Tournament was reinstated. That month, the Wizarding World of England, Bulgaria and France experienced mourning as nearly 3/4 of the students at Hogwarts, Beauxbatons and Durmstrang were slaughtered like cattle and many families mourned the loss of their loved ones. The few who were able to flee the carnage to save their lives were traumatized and filled with terror and horror, -1 try to guess who. The Aurors, as well as the Ministry of Magic of the 3 concerned countries, questioned the survivors. Those who could answer, and there weren't many of them at all, had told the minister and the Aurors who were responsible for this massacre. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, England's national hero, had apparently become a bear monster through dark magic and attacked everyone. At that moment, Cornelius Fudge, with the agreement of many magical families and Dumbledore himself, decided to send men to capture Harry Potter to try him as a criminal and traitor to the magical nation. The French and Bulgarian ministries, for their part, returned to their respective countries with the bodies of the deceased who perished under Harry's blows, while promising to send men as reinforcements if the English magical ministry needed them. A large team of unspeakables and Aurors were sent to Hogwarts to apprehend Harry Potter, but only one returned, and he was so shocked that he was unable to say a word. Furious, Cornelius Fudge sent other teams, but each time, only one person returned and added an episode of horror to the beast's monstrous record. Over time, Harry Potter became the talk of the entire wizarding world, but not as a hero but as an indestructible and impossible to defeat monster. The Aurors and Unspeakables who had returned from their expeditions told everyone about the monstrous creature that now lived within the walls of Hogwarts. When the death toll in the ranks of Aurors and Unspeakables reached 300 aka a year after Harry's transformation, Cornelius, under pressure from Dumbledore and Amelia Bones, decided to abandon the idea of reclaiming the castle and decreed that Hogwarts and its surroundings were now off limits. The village of Hogsmeade was gradually emptied of its inhabitants who feared for their lives because of their proximity to the beast. The magical world gave Harry a new name, Goliath, the Crimson Beast. While the human world grew more and more concerned about the beast, the other living beings, for their parts, enjoyed this new turn of event. With the disappearance of wizards and witches, nature regained these rights over this part of the world. Plants grew between the stone slabs of the paths and moss appeared on the walls and roofs. Small animals and magical beings also took advantage of the disappearance of humans to conquer the places, bringing a little life to these places abandoned by civilization. Anyway, to return to the wizards and witches, they decided to found a new magical school in Northern Ireland, New Hogwarts. Dumbledore, of course, became its headmaster, and Flitwick, the only surviving staff from the old Hogwarts, became its deputy headmaster. It took some time before the school was operational, so the surviving students of the massacre had to continue their magical education elsewhere, either through truancy or by going to a magical school abroad. At the same time, Dumbledore, with the support of his former allies, set out in search of Voldemort's Horcruxes in order to prevent the latter from being resurrected. Normally, it should have been up to Harry to do it, but since the latter was no longer available and the fact that the Horcrux in him was ejected from his body during his monstrous transformation, it was the duty of the headmaster to prevent the return of a terrible enemy. The quest for the Horcruxes was long and perilous, and many people lost their lives destroying them. For example, Remus Lupin lost his life killing Nagini, Voldemort's familiar. But once the last Horcrux was destroyed, it was over. Lord Voldemort would never return to the mortal world. Not long after the end of this quest, Dumbledore died, carried away by a terrible curse caused by one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, and in his will, he expressed his regret towards Harry and his inaction towards the young man who became a bear. In his will, the old wizard also asked that Harry be left alone, and many decided to honor the last wishes of the man who was one of the greatest wizards ever to exist. Shortly after Dumbledore's death, it was Sirius Black's turn to lose his life. The latter, when he learned of Harry's transformation and the massacre that followed, sank into alcohol because he saw himself as responsible for all that. If he had responded and supported Harry like a godfather should, perhaps none of this would have happened, he had thought then. Even after Dumbledore managed to give him a trial and the ministry exonerated him, it did nothing to brighten the once happy and childish man. His depression grew when he learned of the death of Remus, his only friend left in this world, and his state reached its peak when Dumbledore died. Sirius, tired of life and full of remorse, committed suicide, and his body, like that of Remus, was buried near the graves of Lily and James Potter at Godric's Hollow. Now that we know a bit more about what happened in the years following Harry's transformation, let's focus back on Luna. The once student of House Ravenclaw had finished her magical education in 1998 in Beauxbatons with honors, and after her graduation, she traveled the world in search of new creatures to document, while occasionally going to Scotland to visit her one and only friend, Harry himself, or Goliath as he was known all around the magical world. The young woman stopped for a moment to contemplate the place, her mind momentarily swept by memories of the time when she and other students from the old Hogwarts visited this place once frequented by hundreds of people. Then with a shake of her head, she turned her gaze in another direction and a smile appeared on her face as she resumed her journey. As she passed, the little beings who now lived in her place looked at her in silence. They were used to her presence, and everyone knew that she was friends with the lord of her lands. Harming her or trying to drive her away would anger the latter, and his revenge would be terrible. So, they left her alone, content to observe her until she disappeared from their field of vision. As for Luna, she continued on her way as if nothing had happened, because she knew that no creature would ever harm her, both because she was a magizoologist and because of her friendship with Harry. But she didn't dwell on her thoughts, because she had a long way to go before she was reunited with her best friend. She had to reach her destination before nightfall if she continued on her path, and nothing was more difficult than traveling at night, because that time of day was the most dangerous but also the most terrifying. Meanwhile, near the old Hogwarts, in the Forbidden Forest, thunderous roars and cries of terror, pain and agony were heard, along with the horrible sounds of flesh being torn apart. In a large clearing, a bloody battle was taking place between a large group of 40 men and a colossal bear with red and gold fur and emerald green eyes. His men were all wizards, but none were aurors or unspeakables. They were all poachers, come to his woods to illegally kill and capture any creature unfortunate enough to cross their path. They had managed to capture 2 hippogriffs when a colossal being suddenly appeared and charged at them with a furious roar. Initially terrified by the monster's sudden appearance, the poachers regained their composure and abandoned the hippogriffs to engage in combat with the most dangerous and infamous beast in England, Goliath, the crimson beast formerly known as Harry Potter, the boy who lived and became a monster. They thought that with their numbers they could bring down the monster that had caused so much trouble to the magical world, but they were wrong and were now paying the price for their stupidity and arrogance. With a roar of rage, Harry reared up on his hind legs, towering over his enemies at his full height more than 7 meters, before slamming his front paws into the ground. The force of the impact was such that his nearest enemies were thrown backward. Cries were heard from the unfortunate men who had been thrown by Harry's attack as they fell heavily to the ground. Another poacher, his face like most of his companions covered by a hood, pointed his wand in the bear's direction, ready to cast a spell. But he didn't have time as suddenly, Harry slammed the ground with his right foreleg before swiping upward, somehow creating an earth fissure that went forward toward the man who barely had the time to comprehend what happened before he was sent flying backward. The man crashed violently into a tree, which snapped in two upon impact. The shock was so severe that his spine was broken, leaving him in a vegetative state. Without even glancing at the man's almost lifeless body, the crimson and gold bear attacked again, lunging straight at his nearest enemies before snapping his jaws shut around another poacher's body. The man screamed in terror and pain as he felt the beast's sharp fangs pierce his flesh. The bear violently shook his head, ragdolling his victim, before hurling him away, sending him crashing into other poachers standing nearby. In a movement of grace and power, he whirled around and charged his enemies once more, swiping forward with both arms, alternating left and right swipes. His powerful paw strike sent many of his enemies flying through the air, where they crashed against rocks, trees, or other poachers. Its claws ripped open more than one, and some poachers died before they even hit the ground. In the end, out of 40 poachers, only a small handful remained. Some, seeing that the beast was stronger than they thought, decided to flee, abandoning their comrades, while others either more valiant or more stubborn decided to stay and fight against the monster. Monumental mistake, because Harry quickly took care of them all. Standing on his hind legs, the great bear opened his jaws wide to unleash a powerful roar, creating a wave around himself. It was so powerful that it sent men flying before crashing heavily to the ground. Unfortunately, they didn't have time to recover when Harry/Goliath's monstrous, colossal form fell upon them like a wave on the bee, tearing them apart with his claws and fangs. The great bear raised his head and looked with satisfaction at the bodies lying at his paws and then around him. Once again, Harry had protected the forest from a terrible scourge. Turning his head toward where the captured hippogriffs had been, he was relieved to see they were gone, the remains of the ropes that had bound them scattered on the ground. Then, out of the corner of his right eye, he saw movement behind a tree, and judging by the smell, it was a poacher, the last one still alive. As was his custom, he decided to leave him so that he could tell everyone what had happened. With satisfaction, Harry/Goliath sauntered off toward his lair, leaving the poachers' lifeless bodies to whoever wanted them. Moving slowly away from the battlefield and now walking in a world of trees, grasses, and dark bushes, the great bear went deep in thought. His life had changed drastically since he'd swallowed that candy, and yet, he loved his new life. Although he was no longer human, he loved his new form. He was stronger, faster, and more formidable than when he was human. And then, the bonus was that he no longer had to wear a coat or cast warming spells during the winter, thanks both to his fur and to the fact that he could sleep for 6 months. The joys of hibernation. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. After conquering Hogwarts, he set about settling a few scores. The acromantulas living in the forest had tried to eat him in the past, so he dealt with them quickly. Despite their numbers, they were no match for him, and besides, they were instinctively afraid of him. Why? Because of the basilisk blood flowing in his veins. His snakes, being the natural enemies of spiders, terrified Aragog and his kind, and Harry used their fear to easily slaughter them. His actions earned him the friendship and gratitude of other inhabitants of the Forbidden Forest, namely the centaurs, but also the hippogriffs, the theastrals, and the unicorns. They all welcomed him warmly with respect, not only for eradicating those hordes of spiders but also for purging the surrounding area of human vermin. And since he had single-handedly cleaned Hogwarts, the castle became his new lair. Happy to be respected for actions he himself had performed, Harry reciprocated this respect by becoming the protector of his woods. And, for many, he was doing an excellent job. In the years that followed, Harry protected the forest from numerous poachers, both muggle and magical, and the respect of the forest's inhabitants grew with each human he killed. When the Ministry of Magic sent men to capture him, he took great care to leave at least one alive so that the survivor could tell everyone not only of their defeat but also who had vanquished them. This only increased his reputation as a relentless beast. Since the abandonment of the village of Hogsmeade, magical Scotland once again belonged to magical creatures, and they took great care to prevent any witches or wizards from entering these lands. The sole exception was Luna Lovegood, as she was already well known to the inhabitants of the Forbidden Forest before the Hogwarts massacre, being highly regarded by many for her kindness, and when she became a magizoologist, she was the only human tolerated there. At the memory of the young woman, a faint smile appeared on the bear's muzzle. After Ron and Hermione's betrayal, those very people he once called his best friends, he thought he would be alone for the rest of his life. When he met Luna, he found her a little strange, but when she revealed that she believed him when he told everyone he hadn't put her name in the fire goblet, he was overjoyed. Because of this, he asked her to go into the forest to save her from the act he was about to commit, and he succeeded. Luna survived the massacre. After that day, Harry was afraid that the girl would want nothing more to do with him, but she proved him wrong. She visited him whenever she could. Even when she went to Beauxbatons, she always managed to find time to come and see him and spend time with him. Harry/Orson cherished these moments with her and was always looking forward to spending more time with Luna. His friendship with Ravenclaw's former student was the only thing that kept his human spirit alive. He was certain that if he had truly been alone in the world, his humanity, his inner humanity, of course would have been lost, and he would have been nothing more than a beast. But when she wasn't there, he always found companionship elsewhere in the form of Hedwig, the magnificent and loyal snowy owl. Even after he became a bear, the owl stayed by his side, and to tell the truth, she loved this new life. Apart from Luna, Hedwig was the only living creature Harry/Orson was proud to call a friend. Speaking of Hedwig, she became a mother 3 years after the Hogwarts massacre. Her companion was another snowy owl that Luna had brought back from one of her trips some time earlier. She had named her Vanguard. Hedwig fell in love with her at first sight, and they were never apart. Vanguard was wary of Harry at first, but over time, this changed, especially after Hedwig gently with a few pecks made it clear that Harry was dear to her heart. The two snowy owls had already had several broods, and some of their offspring lived nearby. A small, amused snort escaped the great bear's nostrils at the memory of the little snowy owls practicing their flight or when they missed their first prey. Pushing these memories from his mind, Harry focused on his primary mission, returning to his lair. Soon, he left the woods and found himself before a large pile of rotten wood covered in mold, fungi, moss, and lichen. This pile of wood had once been the home of the halfling Hagrid, now completely destroyed. The great bear paused for a moment to contemplate it before continuing on his way, heading straight towards the immense castle which was once a powerful and respected magical school. After a while, the great bear stood before the gates of Hogwarts and walked inside with a sure and confident gait, like a king entering his domain. Outwardly, the mighty castle of Hogwarts had barely changed, it still stood tall, dominating its surroundings, majestic and proud, as it had for centuries. However, for those who knew these places before Harry Potter took possession of them would have immediately noticed a striking difference. In these places where the air once seemed bathed in magic and from which emanated a deep feeling of security and sweetness, now seemed completely dead. If the exterior gave this impression, then the interior of the castle accentuated it. The interior of the castle was in a very sad state. Once, the place was full of light, but now the shadows seemed to stretch, distorting into dark and tortuous reflections of what they had been. Rodents like mice or field mice could be seen roaming the corridors. We also saw some magical creatures like pixies or fairies twirling here and there. Hoots and croaks were heard from time to time, a sign that birds of prey, including owls but also crows, lived inside the walls. Many of his birds once belonged to Hogwarts students but, after the death of their masters, returned to the wild. Some took up residence in the Forbidden Forest, others in the ruins of Hogsmeade, but some remained at Hogwarts. Hedwig, for example. The walls of the castle, now devoid of magic, had also changed. Moss and lichens painted the walls and immense cracks streaked the surface of its last. Many of its cracks were deep gashes caused by massive claws. From these walls, the paintings that once covered them had been torn off by force or pierced by sharp claws. The few survivors were now in the headmaster's office, where the portraits of the headmasters were lamenting the fate of the prestigious academy that once was Hogwarts. The other portraits were destroyed by the new lord of the place because they had the audacity to reprimand him for the actions they had committed. Quickly, they were silenced permanently. As if that weren't enough, the ghosts who once lived at Hogwarts have deserted the place. They had stayed for a time within those walls, but when news of a new English magical school opened, they jumped at the chance and left Hogwarts. Apparently, they didn't want to stay in a place that reminded them of too many bad memories and where blood had been spilled so freely. Harry did not mourn their departure and, on the contrary, was relieved to see them leave, because now the entire castle belonged to him, everything except the headmaster's office, which, despite many attempts, remained inaccessible to him. The other big departure was that of the elves. With magic having left these places, the elves left to find work elsewhere, and according to Luna, many of them worked in this new magical school, New Hogwarts. Dobby, the elf he had once helped, became Luna's assistant, accompanying her on her travels. From time to time, Dobby was with Luna when she came to visit him, and he always greeted the elf with warmth and companionship. The big bear walked through the corridors of Hogwarts, and the few small inhabitants of the place stopped their activities to watch him pass, admiration and respect shining in their eyes, while they followed him with their gaze. Harry ignored them and continued his way through the walls of Hogwarts, heading towards the place where it all began for him, the Great Hall. Once, this room was bathed in light, and the laughter, murmurs and heated discussions of students and teachers could be heard. Now, only silence could be heard, sometimes disturbed by the beating of a bird's wings, the sound of a rodent running on the ground, or the whisper of the wind. The tables, benches, and chairs that once decorated the room had been moved long ago, as had the bodies of the many people who had fallen to the bear's claws and fangs. The centaurs took possession of the chairs, tables and benches, while the bodies were fed to the scavenger. The blood that once covered the ground was completely gone now, and in its place, grass had grown. Like many other rooms, the walls of the Great Hall were covered in claw marks, lichens and moss. If anyone other than Luna of course entered here, he or she would hardly believe that this place was once a large dining room where students and teachers feasted in joy and good humor. Now, the Great Hall had a completely different function. It is now a meeting room for Harry and Luna. With a smile, the large red and gold bear went to the center of the room before lying down on his stomach, his front paws placed forward so that he could rest his massive head on them. Meanwhile, in front of what was the main entrance to Hogwarts, stood Luna Lovegood, who took a moment to gaze at the castle, delving into her memories. She remembered the day when, at the age of 11, she had entered these places for the first time alongside her once friend, Ginny Weasley. At that time, she thought that after entering Hogwarts, she would have more friends and be liked by her peers. It was nothing of the sort. The majority of students looked at her with disdain or ignored her completely. Ginny, her best friend, distanced herself from her so as not to speak with her at all. At first, her friend's abandonment and her forced isolation by her peers hurt her, but she found comfort in the little beings of the forest. And then one day, a new person entered her life and filled her with happiness, Harry Potter. Like her, he was rejected by his peers and for things that were not his doing. Unfairly, everyone turned their backs on him even though he was innocent, and this, Luna could understand, because many despised her because she was the daughter of Xenophilius Lovegood, the director of the newspaper The Quibbler, and seen as a man crazy and full of disillusionment. When Harry asked her not to attend the dinner, she agreed with understanding, sensing in advance that something bad was about to happen. And so it did, the infamous Hogwarts massacre. After that, his whole life changed completely, but for the better. At Beauxbatons she made friends and was treated better in France than she was in England. She owed this new life to the one who became her best friend, the Great Bear Harry/Goliath himself, and she will never forget him. Shaking her head to clear her memories from her mind, the young woman took a deep breath before entering the castle where her great friend was surely waiting for her. Thanks to the fact that she was a student within its walls and because of her numerous visits to see her friend, Luna Lovegood knew every nook and cranny of this castle and she therefore had no trouble finding the great hall where she and her friend usually meet. But as she was about to pass the entrance to the Great Hall of Hogwarts, she stopped and a big, warm smile appeared on her face. As usual, Harry/Goliath was there and he lifted his massive head from his paws, his emerald green eyes staring at her with glee while emitting a small growl. Immediately, the young woman approached the bear before wrapping her arms around its muzzle. The large red and gold bear growled softly as he closed his eyes, enjoying the physical contact while nuzzling her gently. With another smile and after placing a tender kiss on the bear's muzzle, Luna went to sit between its front paws, her back pressed against her friend's muscular chest. Once again, as every time she sat in this precise location, she felt not only safe but also even closer to the big bear. "Hello Harry, it's been a while," she commented softly, using her left hand to slide his chin. Harry growled softly and touched her cheek with his muzzle in a tender and affectionate gesture. Her green eyes shone with happiness at being reunited with her friend again and she saw this and warmed his heart, filling it with love and affection. With a sigh, the young woman pressed herself against her friend's chest and closed her eyes in contentment. The bear's fur was so soft and warm she suddenly felt a little tired. With a slight yawn, Luna closed her eyes and fell asleep. For his part, Harry, after noticing that his friend had fallen asleep, gave the latter a warm look before following her example. With a jaw-dropping yawn, the big bear closed his eyes and joined his friend in the world of dreams, happy to be reunited with her again. Later, when they were awake, Luna told her friend about her latest adventures and then they played together for hours. Then, when it came time for Luna to leave, Harry escorted her to the abandoned village of Hogsmeade before watching her leave. The big bear, although sad, knew that the young magizoologist would return one day. She always did and like always, he would wait for her. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for more crossovers. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lionheart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video, till then goodbye.